Welcome back to another episode of the Better Than I Found It podcast. You're listening to Mike McGraw, the men's golf coach at Baylor. My guest today just happens to be one of my all-time favorite athletes, regardless of sport. John Smith has led Oklahoma State's wrestling program since 1992 and has led the Cowboys to 5 NCAA titles, among other accomplishments. But John is also considered by most to be the greatest American wrestler of all time, having won an unprecedented 6 world championships in a row, 2 of those Olympic gold medals. To me, John Smith is the Tiger Woods of his sport, no doubt about it. Join me as John delves into the incredible training regimen that he put himself through during his college years and the years immediately following. As you'll see, it was his mindset that he was creating that set him apart from other athletes, far beyond the physical work he was doing. This interview with John will be in 2 parts. Part 1 will be John Smith, the athlete. Part 2, John Smith, the coach. I know you'll enjoy the special interview with John today. Thank you for listening. John Smith, welcome to Better Than I Found It. Thanks so much for coming and joining us today.
Thank you, Coach.
Yeah, how are things in Stillwater? I missed that place. How is it?
Well, it's good. Football team started off swinging away and winning some tough, tight games. Having to. It's been kind of fun watching them. Kind of dig out these games. It hadn't been easy. We've done the same thing here at Baylor. Same thing. Yeah, I've noticed that, and I guess we hit in a couple of weeks. I think
it's this next weekend. Yeah, I think so. Up at your place.
Yeah.
I talked to Nick Florence, a former Baylor quarterback. He never really did like going to Boone Pickens Stadium. He never loved that place.
Well, it's pretty good. Definitely a special place for us.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, listen, I imagine you have either just started preseason workouts or getting ready to. When does that start?
We've been in them since school started. You get your 8 hours, and just like everyone, out of season. And we're spending 3 hours in the weight room during the week, and then 5 hours of just skill related. You find, I don't know if you find this, but you just see a deficiency, a little bit more of a deficiency in some of the areas in my sport where they've just neglected some areas. They're good in other areas. Sometimes they're great in other areas, but just real deficiency. And, for us, it's you got to really attack it or it gets exposed, in college wrestling. So I'm sure you have things similar to that.
It's exactly like that. When they lose attention to detail and just kind of get on cruise control, things take a hit, and eventually it shows up on the golf course. It will. So,
yeah.
Well, when does the actual season start? Probably November, correct?
Well, we'll wrestle. The actual season starts in November. Get 16 days. We're starting at Stanford, and on the road to Minnesota is our first 2 matches. So we're breaking into it pretty hard and pretty fast.
Yeah, heading out west. That's a big deal to go out to Stanford. But so you're getting ready for your season. But I literally am thankful that you've taken the time to come and join me today. I've had a lot of obviously golf-related guests. You're the only wrestling coach I've had on this podcast so far, but I think everything you have to offer, Coach, I think will undoubtedly benefit my listeners, and both the student athletes and or prospects that listen to this podcast, and parents, and certainly coaches. So let's get right to it if you're okay with that.
You bet.
Okay, perfect. I'd like to sort of approach it from 2 angles. One is John Smith, the athlete. And I know you're not super comfortable talking about accolades that happened a long time ago or whatever, but I think it's necessary to get my golf people kind of understanding where you're coming from as an athlete. And then the other part would be John Smith, the coach, which I think you're a fantastic coach, one of my favorite. And actually, John, I'm not in a hero worship sense, but you're one of my favorite athletes of all times. I've got Ben Hogan and Jack Nicklaus kind of at the top. You're right there behind those 2 guys only because you weren't a golfer.
Wow.
And then Roger Staubach and Lou Brock are my other 2. So those are my 5 favorite athletes, and you're there. So I haven't had any of those guys on the podcast, I promise you.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, absolutely. Well, so what you need to do for my listeners, I think, is tell me how a kid, one of 10 children, I think you had 6 sisters and 3 brothers. Is that correct?
That's correct.
That's a big family, John.
Big family, big family.
It is. And so any part of that create the competitive side of you?
Well, it does. I mean, just, but at the same time, you learn some things through a large family. One is respect for food, respect for clean clothes, respect for a hot shower,
Wow.
respect for underwear. I mean, it goes really deep when you have 10, and we were all together for about 6 years, meeting all together till the first one graduated and left home. We were all together for 6 years. So you can imagine 10 in a family. And of course your mother and father makes 12. And we had 5 bedrooms, and my mother and father used 1, and the rest of us used 4, and we kind of scattered in and out of each one. And it was a very Christian setting, very devout setting. For my mom and dad, they raised us Catholic, and it was a big part of what we did every day. And so we stayed grounded pretty well. And there were some crazy things that go along, but I think what you learn from a large family, there's some deficiencies as you go to college. I learned that, you didn't touch someone else's food, you didn't grab someone's t-shirt and wear it, and so you find out that there's some things that you do that people assume is a little bit dysfunctional, and so it can be the same thing for somebody that grew up as a single child. If you'll find out lessons. But I tell you, my family was tough. My dad was tough. It was no excuses. Get up, let's go. Quit crying. If there's moments in our career, whatever it may be, whether it be in school, whether it be in sports, my sisters were tough. We would little wrestling tournaments all the time in our living room. When I was in 4th, 5th, 6th grade, I could beat everyone in the state, and every time I traveled outside the nation or outside the state, I would win some big regional events. But I could never win my tournament in my own living room against my sisters, so that's how tough they were. And so,
that's incredible.
Everything I have, I can always look back and see that, my dad did a lot of things right. He wasn't perfect, but he did a lot of things right. My mom was there pretty constantly, as a support or whatever we were doing.
That's been a real theme with all of the guests, the athletes and coaches I've had on. They almost all point to parents. And a lot of people are really successful in life basically because their parents helped them on that road and got them on the right path. And I know your parents did, but 1 of 10, I was 1 of 7 and thought I had a big family.
Yeah. Well, you're right. I mean, it's critical. And I think, the one thing, as I've been a parent to 5 children, you realize that you do make mistakes. You recognize maybe from your oldest to your youngest, and there's some mistakes that you make during your as a parent, but you just never quit, and I can look back on my dad and my mom, and I can remember a few times when, man, they were maybe way too hard on me or way too hard on one of my sisters, and it affected them for a period of time. I mean, we're not perfect, but as long as a parent recognizes that they got to evolve as a parent, and you continue to evolve, and you get better and better and better, and in the long run, if you have a good balance in your life, got a lot of hope for your children.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I love hearing that. I also I know you grew up. You were not a big kid, so obviously you were gonna wrestle at a lower weight class for sure. But your high school record was pretty good. It was 105-5. I mean, that's winning a lot of matches. But as I recall, the story that I learned when I was in Stillwater was Leroy, your oldest brother, was a national champion at Oklahoma State, and he almost had to talk the current coach at that time into taking you. Is that kind of how that happened? Is that how you got to OSU?
Yeah, I think it was similar, or maybe the coaches felt a responsibility. You know how we coach and we're dealing with brothers and things like that. I think it was more of Coach Chesbro, Paul Martin at the time, just felt a responsibility that they needed to recruit me. But you kind of knew at the time that they're doing it out of respect and talent, and so. I don't know. It worked out for both of us.
Oh boy, did it ever. But so you get to OSU and you had a very successful freshman year, but probably not up to the standard of what you thought. So here's kind of where I want to go with this line of questioning, if I could. So you're at OSU. Your older brother is a legend there at OSU. You've got you're at one of the iconic wrestling programs in all of the history of NCAA wrestling. So you're in a good spot. And your obviously goal is to win a national championship, but you had other goals eventually, and that was to win the world championship. So I want athletes to know what it takes to truly be elite. And I want athletes, golfers, to know what kind of sacrifices need to be made. So when you got to Oklahoma State, if you'll take me through the first couple of years and then through a decision you made to redshirt that I thought was not unprecedented, but it was that's a pretty great commitment to get ready for the world. So talk about that time at OSU and how you got ready to become the world champion.
Well, when I got to Oklahoma State, there's a level of confidence that you have just bringing from high school that is sometimes just over the top, not real. You got to learn that the fact that, in our sport, it's physical. Right. I mean, you get in the room and you're wrestling these fifth year seniors and you're 17. I went to school at 17 years old. And I realized, oh my gosh, scared me to death. The first few days, just realized my goodness, these guys are, feel like King Kong, to what you've been working out with and what you've been training with at home. And it gave me an alert real quick that wasn't ready. And then I had a coach, Paul Martin, tell me, attorney here in town now, has had a lot of success. He said, the time is with you, basically saying, listen, stay in the fight. 30 days from now, you're going to see a difference. And so I took that to heart and stayed in the fight. And 30 days from when we started practice, it did change, and I ended up being a starter for the Oklahoma State wrestling team. Make a long story short, had a real successful year. Went into nationals ranked third, and I got beat out, and it was one of the most devastating things I've ever felt. Coach Chesbro at the time was the head coach for Oklahoma State. And we ended up losing that tournament by a few points. And really the difference was me not placing at the NCAA championships. And you can only imagine what that feels like, and when we got home, they actually ended up firing Coach Chesbro for taking second in the NCAA championships, and so, I've got a lot of that weight on my shoulder, thinking, for God's sakes, if I'd have done my job, we would be bringing the championship trophy home. And by the way, it was one of the worst decisions in the history of any college athletics. I mean, it was a horrible, horrible mistake that affected our program for a long time. So, that experience of not placing, coming out of high school, winning state championships, being recognized, for being maybe one of the better high school wrestlers, really moved me, but what I found out was got to be ready when it's time to be ready, and so I had a mental lapse at that NCAA championship, and it was a time when you realize that you got to be at your best when it's time to be your best, and so how do I piece all that together and figure it out? And, talking to people, asking people that question, you don't get a lot of answers. It all goes back to a lot of hard work, training. You got to be doing your sport 24/7. And but anyway, that experience of not placing allowed me to kind of think about that process of being the best at the most critical time, and the most critical time for me, in a career of wrestling would be, at the NCAA championships, a world team trials, the world team, the Olympic team trials, the Olympic team. You're going to see a different person than you saw during the year. You're going to see a better person, and so that I had that mentality of thinking that way following my freshman year. And I went into my sophomore year, ended up learning that I could wrestle with injuries. I learned that, listen, they're not going to wait on you. The coach is not going to wait on you because you have a shoulder injury. They got to put someone else in, and I learned how to wrestle with injuries, because I wanted to be in that lineup so bad. And of course, the year before, not placing at the NCAA championships was a motivator. And I finished second, had a good year, had a good tournament. What a great experience I had, coming off of injuries and fighting back into the lineup and actually going to the Big 8 at the time, or Big 12, no, Big 8.
Yeah.
And finishing up at the NCAA championship. So that was my first 2 years, I'm sitting here with this second place and out of 2 years finishing second, and just sitting back and thinking about it just wasn't enough. It was just like 2 of my years are gone. I got 2 left. And I was thinking about being a 4-time national champion, and I'm thinking, what a lousy place to be in right now. Where we were thinking, what I was thinking, it's great for a lot of people, but at the time it just didn't seem to be enough, and it kind of scared me to a point where I'm like, I got 2 years. I mean, this college thing it's a great experience. It may be, looking back on my career, I mean, my 5 years at Oklahoma State as a college student, I don't know if there's anything better outside of raising my own children, and having a wonderful wife. But I can't really tell you that the Olympics and winning gold medals that was better. I can't really tell you that. I tell you, it was a great experience in college, and so I didn't want it to end real quick. I thought I was behind, so immediately I thought about redshirting. We were in a time where there was a little pressure on the coaches, and they really needed me in the lineup. And I said, I just need some time. Maybe pull me out in the second semester. I told the coach at that time, going into my 3rd year. But I need some time to myself. I need to find myself. I need to find what I want to do. I mean, I hear all these coaches telling me what it's going to take to end up on the top. But I can't put it all together. I just can't mentally put it all together. But I just felt like I needed some time. And so I took that redshirt year, and I got to take it the whole year. My coach made a good decision for me the second semester. He saw the progress I was making. What happened to me, I think, was at the beginning, and stop me anytime you want, Coach. Okay.
You're good.
What happened to me at the beginning of that 3rd year, going into my redshirt year, I felt left out. I felt left out, like I'm not a part of this team, and I think it was the first time in my career where I felt left out, like, I'm not wrestling. I'm not on the team. I'm not being noticed. I'm not doing this, and it just had such an impact on me, and it just drove me to another level. Like, I'll show you when I come back, just a level of encouragement, or not necessarily encouragement, a level of motivation that came out of me from feeling like I've been left out. And I really started working, and I ended up going to the senior trials that year. This this is for the world championships. This is the older guys. And I'm 20 years old at the time, 19. And I go into the trials and I end up literally having the greatest tournament of my life. And I move on to the world championships, and my first world championships, winning my first world championship, and here I am, a guy that has never won a national championship, but he's winning a world championship. And so what took place in that year, really, I tell people that John Smith, the wrestler that started, they getting ready to start his junior year, after winning a world championship, would literally smash the John Smith that was 1 year previous to that. It wouldn't even be a match. It wouldn't even be, it would be ugly.
Did you know that at the time, John? Were you aware of that at the moment that you were? Oh
yeah. Yeah. And it was all just about you. Just, you can talk about skill and you can talk about getting better, but really the mentality part of it is when you find something that really is driving you. And for me, I think a little bit of it was just being out and training on my own and recognizing that really, the coaches can make a big difference. There's no question. But in the end, it's going to be you that really makes the bigger jump than what the coach can do. It's going to be that individual athlete that's highly motivated, that's hungry and is screaming for success, and desperate for it at times, but
John,
in a good way.
You talk about being desperate for success. You told me this story about 13 years ago. I think it was one of the first times you had told this story, kind of outside of the purview of your family or whatever. But during that year when you were training to get your mind right, you did something very unusual at night that not a lot of people would do. And can you talk about that at Gallagher-Iba, what you did?
Yeah. So, during that year leading up to my first world championship, and of course I redshirted the whole year. I'd set my alarm a lot of times from 12 o'clock at night till 2 a.m, and just to give me some sort of edge. I don't know why I came up with it. I just felt like, I need to do something harder. What's hard? Going into wrestling practice and working out an hour. I mean, we all do that every day, but what can I do differently that nobody else is doing? And, I just imagine that, okay, I'm going to set my alarm for 2 a.m, and I'm going to get up and I'm going to walk across the street. There was a window that I always left open when I started this, where I could slip through this Gallagher Hall. It was Gallagher Hall at the time. And now our arena is called Gallagher-Iba Arena. And I'd slip through this window and I'd find myself at the steps of Gallagher Hall on the second floor. And I'd just start running these stadiums, and I'd run them for about 30 minutes until I couldn't do any more. And I just kept thinking to myself, that I'm doing this while the Russians and the Bulgarians and the Turks, are sleeping, and I just, and I didn't even know what time it was in some of those countries, but I'm just thinking, are they doing this? Is this something that they're doing at 2 a.m. at their time? Are they waking up? And so for me, it just created just an edge where you just feel like I deserve something. And that happened throughout my career, throughout the next 6 years of my career. Those stadiums, created just a level of energy that I was looking for, that any athlete's looking for. What do I need to do to get better? How do I get better? You often have motivating athletes that are asking those questions. What do I need to do? Well, my question was answered. Those stadiums is what did it for me, and everything that I was looking for from a mentality standpoint. You'd be surprised just when you do something that's just a little different, something just seems a little odd. wow, what can it, I mean, it's amazing what it did for me, and I just felt like, over a long period of time of running stadiums late at night, just gave me the little edge that, every athlete's looking for.
My guess is you probably didn't advertise this. There was no Twitter, so you didn't put it on Twitter. You just did it for your own self and your own self-belief. But another thing you told me way back when that I want you to expound upon is this. The Bulgarians, the Russians, all of these people had come from poverty, these wrestlers. And if they made it in wrestling, they would get a high-paying coaching job in their country. But if they didn't, it was likely they would go back to that life of poverty. So they were literally wrestling for their lives. And I don't know how a guy in the United States of America gets in that spot, but you were trying to do it, weren't you?
Yeah. And I got to see it, Coach. I went over to Russia when I was 19 years old. And at the same time I redshirted. That was part of that redshirt year that I took. I went to Russia, and we wrestled dual meets across the country at 5 or 6 different cities in a tournament called Tbilisi, and it was the second tournament I got beat out of in my life, and really after that tournament is when I started running these stadiums. We were traveling by train from one spot to another, and I just got through wrestling the Tbilisi tournament. It's what it's called in Tbilisi, Georgia. I got beat out, and I'm just sitting there and I'm thinking to myself, my gosh, here I am. And I'm, it didn't really make any difference to me about what my age was or how old I was. I just know that I got beat out again for a second tournament in my life. And as we're traveling, I'm looking around, looking to the right and looking to the left, and I'm looking at some of these places that we're going through. And then I realized real quickly, I mean, my gosh, I'm just in the middle of poverty. Like, how can I ever, feel what these guys feel and how important it is for them to be successful? And even though I grew up in a family of 10, I lived pretty comfortable. When I'm looking around in some of these places that we're going through, just you understood why they're so tough. You understood real quickly what they were fighting for. They wasn't just fighting for a medal. They were fighting for food. They were fighting for living space. They were fighting for their whole family to be living in a better place. How am I going to duplicate that? What's my chances of creating an environment around myself that these guys have? You're not going to beat these guys. I mean, I got beat by the guy that was on 4th team, and I'm thinking that, there's 3 guys better than him, and so it really shaped me in a mature way as I came back home off of that and trying to find something that was real, that was going to be challenging to me, that was going to be painful, that was going to be, that's going to force me to do some things that's very uncomfortable, and later in my career, I really controlled my spending and things that I did. I cut it down to a minimal. All of a sudden I set a budget for myself. I can't spend anything outside that, no matter what you're making, no matter how much you're making. You're going to stick closely to a budget and just try to duplicate maybe a little bit of their world, and for those reasons, when you make those sacrifices, Coach, I just think that those are the things that what you're looking for. How do I get better? Well, it's not always the work that you're put in. We all work hard. There's a lot of people that work hard. It's the little things that you do different that makes a lifestyle change for you that becomes a little bit uncomfortable to you, because most people don't want to get up at 2 a.m. Most people don't want to budget when they have a lot of money, or, these things are uncomfortable. And so it just allowed me to kind of find myself answering a lot of the questions that I needed to answer to try to get better.
That is a perfect segue into what I was going to say, which was, this is way more than physical skills. It's way more than just the hard work you're putting in. It's a mentality and it's a mindset that if guys would explore that part of themselves, there's no telling what they would find out about themselves. And that's what I'm constantly trying to get kids to understand. There's something inside of you don't know is there right now.
Well, and I think the only time you can reach it, is creating scenarios that are uncomfortable.
Yes.
I mean, when you think about it, I mean, and I think I said it a little bit earlier, I want to be the best when it's time to be the best. Right. And so how do you do that? Well, you think about, wrestling 30 matches a year, 33 matches a year. And the longest the match can go, unless it goes into overtime, is 7 minutes. Well, you add that up, that's 210 minutes. That's not a long time, over a season, and it's, so what are you doing when you're not wrestling those 210 minutes? That's what, to be able to perform at the most critical time, I got beat pretty much every year during the season, except for 1 or 2 seasons, but I never got beat once I figured some things out for 6 years of world and Olympic titles. And I took pride in performing at my best when it was time to perform at my best. But I think the only way you get there is it's got to be uncomfortable. You're not going to get there by just working harder. Working harder sometimes is not uncomfortable. It's creating an environment where maybe you're personally sacrificing something. Maybe you need to lose. You need to drop down to another weight. You need to get stronger. Therefore, you need to not only be lifting in the morning, but you also need to be climbing rope late at night, in the evening. I don't know, just creating those environments where it's not comfortable is when I see you've got a chance to really progress.
Well, you put yourself in a different place. And I would say very few people who finish runner-up in the national championship are going to be so disappointed they decide I've got to take a year off so I can get my mind right. I mean, that's what was so unprecedented about what you did, in my opinion. The other thing is, I'm gonna say a couple of things here that, John, I told you you're one of my favorite athletes, but I honestly didn't know your all-time wrestling record. So I'm going to give those numbers right here and right now. I mean, all the titles you won, but you, from high school wrestling through until you won your second gold medal, 434 victories, 15 losses, 2 draws, 434 and 15. I mean, John, come on.
I'm trying to think of the 15. The 15 was bothering me.
You don't want to think of those 15. But the truth is, that's an amazing record. And I don't know if it'll be matched anytime soon. I don't know if anybody's matched it since. I doubt it. But that's a lot of dominance. But you didn't do it just because physically you were skilled or you outworked everybody. You did it because of what you just described.
Yeah. No, there's no question. My body frame is long and lanky, for my weight class.
Yes.
And if you notice some of the greatest wrestlers in the world today, and even back then, were short, stocky, just really powerful. So, one of the things I recognized is I'm going to have to change my style. And I started that my first year. I won the world championships, kind of wrestling my old style, just determination. I won, I don't know, I think 4 matches in that world championship by less than 2 points, just gutted it out and just found a way to get my hand raised, whether it was pretty or not. Eventually you get in some of those matches, and it doesn't matter if you're not wrestling good or if you're not competing at your best. Finding ways to win is also another way that you start to elevate yourself, and it can be some of the best wins you have to create a much more confident athlete. Right, is when you're winning and it's ugly. It's easy to win, it's easy to lose and it be ugly.
Well, you mentioned that, but there's some ingenuity in there. You had to figure out different ways of wrestling, especially because you had an unusual body for your weight class. But talk about the John Smith single leg. I've never heard you talk about it. It's your signature move that everybody talked about for years and years and years. So talk to me about that.
Well, it was kind of right after my first world championship, and I had a coach at the time, Leroy, my oldest brother, just mentioned to me, listen, most people go backwards from here, and I'll just kind of just hit me in the face with it, I mean, like literally a week after the world championships, I come back to Stillwater, and I have a parade in my hometown. I have a parade in Stillwater, people celebrating, with me, and my oldest brother's telling me, listen, most people go backwards from here, and it just hit me in the face. And I'm like, and I took it to heart. It was like, it scared me, and he says, he told me the one thing about multiple champions, the guys that go on and win continuously or time after, with each year, they're finding themselves on top, is they continue to develop. Right. And so from that point forward, I got better every single year. The wrestler that wrestled, my first world championship was in 87. I tell people this all the time. The wrestler in 1990 would have destroyed the wrestler in 1987. That's how much better I got, that I just gradually improved. And of course, being long and lanky and dealing with powerful guys coming at me, I just had to create an environment where I had to utilize my speed and my quickness from my feet. And so I did a lot of stance and motion where you're moving your feet in circles, a lot like a boxer who stands up and just shadow boxes for hours after hours. Well, in wrestling, it's a lot harder because you're bending your knees. You're not standing tall, so you can't do it hours after hours. But I came across this particular skill and technique. It's called a low single leg, that I just started working on this single leg. And all of a sudden I started jabbing at single, and I was just doing it a little bit different than everyone else was doing it. We'll make a long story short. I just felt like I was having so much success in practice. I'd have guys say, hey, listen, I'd bring guys in the wrestling room and say, listen, all I want you to do is try to defend me. Don't let me get to your ankle. And of course, when I was hitting a low single leg, it's a shot to the ankle, and it's quick, explosive, and it's really a dart, just boom. And then the finishes were created following that over years and years. But that's all I would do. I'd say, do not let me get to your ankle. Do not let me. I'd offer money. I'd offer him meals. I'd offer him anything I could. And they couldn't stop me, and it was just a level of confidence. Oh my goodness, what's coming next? And of course I had already won a world championship. And then I just knew, my goodness, I'm better. I'm way better. And I followed it up winning the Olympic gold medal.
A lot of people outside the sport don't know that the world championships happen every year, but in an Olympic year, the Olympics is the world championship. So
that's right.
Your first Olympic gold in 1988 at Seoul was, it had to be a special victory. Yeah,
it was great. It was something that, we take a lot of pride here at Oklahoma State. We have 9 wrestlers since 1932, 9 wrestlers that have won 11 Olympic gold medals, and it was just a really special for me because, I love my school. Oklahoma State was a big part of me when I was growing up at 10 years old, and for me to be one of those 9, it was just exciting. It was exciting to be a part of it. And of course I was the 8th one. Kendall Cross, one of my teammates, ended up coming along and winning, being the 9th one. But it was an exciting time, and I just kind of knew that the best of me is still yet to come, and you're winning the Olympics, and it wasn't an easy Olympics. But every time it got real critical, Coach, in some of those matches, I pulled away, and I think I look back on that and try to explain it to young wrestlers that really It was the stairs at 2 a.m. It was the small little sacrifices of living slim, that's what really made the difference. It wasn't necessarily all the work I was doing in the room, although I was developing the low single leg. It was a combination of things that I did outside the room that I think really gave me the little edge during those critical moments in a tournament. Are you going to win or are you going to lose?
Well, you didn't lose very often, John, and you won 6 world championships in a row, and that's kind of a perfect segue. And thank you for all of that information about what you did as an athlete. I want my guys, this will be required listening for them. Okay, we'll stop the episode right there. This week has been John Smith, the athlete. Next week, I'm going to be talking to John about his coaching strategies and the success he's had as a coach at Oklahoma State. And I think you'll really enjoy that. So please tune in next week.